Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Ask the Voice of Authority, brought to you by Carter Jonas, GLE, and London Square Partners. My name is Toby Fox. I'm the Managing Director of 3Fox, the marketing agency for councils. And our job is to keep our network of councils and developers and investors and their influencers and advisors connected. And one of the ways that we do that is by interviewing public sector leaders and senior officers to give our network a deeper understanding of the vision for a place and how it will grow and evolve by hearing from the people shaping that vision and what makes them tick. You can find an archive of over 350 written and recorded interviews at thevoiceofauthority.co.uk. Now, the format of our live interviews is really simple. We ask the Voice of Authority 7 questions. The first 3 cover their wish list and the challenges they must overcome to deliver that list and the partners they're seeking to help them. And then we'll ask our Voice of Authority what constitutes good development and who or what has shaped their views on growth and the watershed moments in their life and career that have led them to our screens today. And then finally, we'll ask what they get up to outside of work. What are the interests and the passions that drive and motivate them and perhaps shape those views and ambitions? And for the last fortnight, we've been inviting questions from viewers through Twitter and LinkedIn, and we've got 2 audience member questions putting their own questions to ask the Voice of Authority today. And we're delighted that today those questions are going to be put to the new leader of the London Borough of Hounslow, Councillor Shantanu Rajawat. Now, Councillor Rajawat inherits 2021's Council of the Year, an organisation that's delivered over 1,000 new homes, and of course one in which he played an integral part as Cabinet Member for Finance. He takes over from one of London's political stalwarts, Steve Curran, who stood down due to illness after 8 years at the helm, and his Labour group control an overwhelming 52 out of 62 seats. So how will Councillor Rajawat execute his pledge to forge out in a bold new direction for an even better borough? How will his new administration deliver its promised 1,000 new homes, as well as buying 1,000 more social rent homes? And what form will £300 million investment in council estates take? Will it be able to deliver on a promise to attract significant inward investment to boost its own direct investment in town centre regeneration? And what do plans to radically overhaul the current system of community consultation mean for your work, viewers, in Hounslow? Let's find out. Councillor Rajawat, Shantanu, if you'll join us on the screen now and tell us what 3 things are at the top of your wish list for Hounslow.
Well, good morning, Toby and everyone, and thank you very much for coming on today. It's great to have you all here, and I'm honoured and humbled to be elected as leader of the council. To start that question, I think you look back a little bit, and you know, Toby, you mentioned it in your introduction. I owe a lot of the successes of the council to Steve Curran, and his legacy will always be felt in Hounslow. And I think that gives us a really strong base in which to build for the next 4 years. Our manifesto as a Labour Party, as a controlling group on the council, was titled Ambitious for Hounslow. And that is absolutely true, and that will translate very neatly into our corporate plan, which will be out in a few weeks' time. So we are ambitious in terms of development, we're ambitious for our communities, we're ambitious for our young people, and we're ambitious for a very green environment in and around Hounslow. So in terms of the sort of top 3, for me, personally, as council leader, I want to see a really inclusive council. What we often pick up on the doorstep, and it's often on single issues, but sometimes apathy towards politics and politicians plays out on the doorstep as well, and people sort of often feel that the council sits up here and they're sort of, as residents, are at the bottom of the chain, as it were. And that's something that I really want to address. And this comes back to, and I'm sure we'll talk through it over the course of this discussion, around the way we engage with our residents. So bringing the council closer to residents, I think, is really, really important. And consulting, not for the sake of consulting, but consulting to actually understand what makes communities, individuals, residents and businesses tick in the borough, and how we can place ourselves in the best way to meet their needs. So that's the first thing. The second thing, as I mentioned just a second ago, is around that cleaner and greener agenda. We were very early in declaring a climate emergency, and we've got a very comprehensive climate emergency action plan, along with other strategies that sort of support it. And we have to acknowledge we're on the doorstep of Heathrow, and that presents its challenges, and it's working with the likes of Heathrow to make sure that they're also on side with the agenda, and that we are using our position as a local authority to work very closely and coordinate with partners to be able to deliver the aspirations. Because I think residents, again, on the doorstep tell us we want a cleaner borough. We want air quality is something that's really, really important. But also within that, perhaps they aren't able to articulate it, but clean jobs, green jobs of the future, I think will also be really, really important. So that's the second thing. And then, there was quite a bit in the manifesto, and there'll be quite a bit in the corporate plan. But for me personally, it's giving our young people the best chance in life. I was born in Hounslow. I've been brought up in Hounslow, educated in Hounslow, apart from when I went to university, which was an experience in itself, but we won't talk about that now. In terms of our young people, we're really proud that we want to introduce a young person's guarantee, and we're sort of defining that at the moment and really working. But that's, if you imagine the NHS, that sort of concept of cradle to grave in the NHS, for us, it's sort of cradle to adulthood and the world of work for our young people. And that could be skills, education. We're really proud in Hounslow that all of our schools are either good or outstanding by Ofsted standards, which is something that we want to build on. But we acknowledge that not everybody will go to sixth form and then on to college and then on to university. We want apprenticeships in the borough. We want real partnerships with those businesses that are in the borough. And as part of our inward investment, we would like our partners, those that are coming in, to really take on that mantle of offering apprenticeships for young people and opportunities for young people to get into the world of work. So there is a lot, Toby, but hopefully that gives you a flavour of the sort of top three for me personally.
Yeah, just unpacking that first one, looking at being an inclusive council, being more engaged. How are you gonna sort of measure that? How will you know if you've succeeded? What does good look like?
With the way you consult and engage, you have to acknowledge that you're not going to be able to satisfy everyone, and often people measure how well they've been engaged with how much they actually agree with what you're saying to them and how much they agree with you. But broadly speaking, we have a number of measures. We do a resident survey every year, which sort of talks about how people interact with the council. And generally speaking, that's on the whole been quite positive, but where there have been areas of deficiencies in the past, they've been significant areas of deficiency. So, for example, how do people contact the council? Simple things like, if I want to do something with the council, how do I contact them? And we hear on the there's no doubt that a decade of austerity has really gutted the place to a certain degree, reduced the number of staff, the headcount, and that's made it more difficult to be responsive. And to a certain degree, we are replacing what we've lost in the past. So small measures like being able to pick up the phone if you so wish and speak to someone and have something done that you need doing. We're very keen on digital in the council, so redesign the website to make it more transactional so that you can get what you need to do done very quickly, and something happens. So those are small measures. On the larger stuff, I think it's very difficult to measure, but you get a sense when a community feels that they are close to the council and the council is listening to them. Their ability to actually tell us what they want increases, and that capacity increases, and seeing an increase in the amount of casework that my councillors receive would actually be very welcome. Hearing what communities want and being out there and seeing that is really, really important as well.
I can just see it now that it'd be really welcomed by you, an increase in caseload for your colleagues. Would they really welcome All those emails piling in. Well, let's park that. Let's park that. But it's a good chance to sort of segue into the next part of the interview, which is around the challenges you face in delivering that wish list. So let's look at the cleaner and greener side of things. What challenges do you face in delivering that? And I'm thinking of things like the cost of decarbonising all the council's stock and so on. You've set a target for reaching a sustainability level at the local authority. What is that target, and is it realistic?
So we want to be carbon neutral by 2030, if my memory serves me right. And that's more ambitious than I think, from memory, the government's targets are, which I think is 2050 from memory. And so, yes, that will be a challenge. And a lot of it is financial. Again, without wanting to sound like a broken record, we've had 10 years of austerity. We've had our budgets cut significantly, and that really does impact on the ability of the organisation. We've lost a lot of good staff over the years, and with that loss, the sort of institutional knowledge goes with it as well, and that's to the detriment of the local authority and the local communities. So there's no doubt that the financial aspect is going to be a key challenge for us. We know that we've got big challenges in terms of an aging population, which does impact on our ability to spend. Grants are going down year on year, so we're having to find and fund ourselves. And interestingly, the assumption often is that every local authority receives similar sort of funding, and actually the formula that exists doesn't do that. And as a local authority, Hounslow has always had a very low base in terms of grants, so we've always been reliant on the income we can generate ourselves, and that impacts. But to park that to one side, we still need to be innovative, and that's where the green agenda kind of comes from. So what we're really looking for, and sorry, the other thing, just before I sort of put my ask out there, is around that sense of community, that place. So what we realized during the pandemic, and we kind of knew it, but it was very laid bare before us during the pandemic, is actually our residents value the place. We've got 4 big town centres, but then we've also got neighbourhoods and villages, and people feel very wedded to their local community, and that sense of place is really important, and it's trying to bring that out. So when we're looking at the green agenda, as it were, we're looking for partners that are really looking to come with us on that journey. And that's really, really important for us. So it's not just about infrastructure, it's about the place that communities find, that communities relate to, and that's really, really important. And with that, there are massive opportunities for our partners as well, to do something really worthwhile.
So is what you're saying that target, that 2030 target, is achievable even with no change to the sort of current funding regime and austerity and so on? You think with your innovations you can reach out to partners, to the private sector, to support you in delivering that ambition?
Yeah, I think it is, and it's about looking at how you do things differently. Again, the pandemic kind of tore up the rule book, the traditional rule book. So we feel that 2030 is very, very achievable, because there's a willingness to work with not only the private sector, but other public organizations as well. If you imagine, as a local authority, in one respect, without sounding too pompous, we hold the mandate. As elected members, we're the ones that are elected, and actually we have a unique position to be able to coordinate with the private sector, with other public organizations, to really say, look, how can we be greener? How can we be more sustainable in what you do? How can we think about the green agenda as a whole system across Hounslow? And then we've got to remember that there are sub-regional groups as well, across West London as well, who are all looking at similar sort of things. So how can we work together to try and harness those partnerships, both public and private? And the other thing I would say is, one thing that we've been very successful in as a council is really articulating what we want and going out there and getting external funding opportunities as well, be it from the private sector or be it from government for special projects as well. That I think works really well.
Great stuff, thanks. And just continuing on this sort of challenges, I'm going to put you a question from one of our viewers. This is from Peter Eversden, who's chairman of the London Forum of Amenity and Civic Societies. In your efforts to produce an inclusive borough, and also to give life chances to younger people, improve life chances for younger people, social housing is going to be an important element, an important tool. Can you get the required number of social and London living wage homes built?
I think what I would say to Peter, and I'm grateful to him for the question, is that we know that there's national policy doesn't really sit on our side, and the funding isn't quite there to deliver truly affordable housing needs, to address the housing crisis that we face in Hounslow and across London in particular. So Peter will know, and you'll know, that we've pledged the ambitious target to secure 2,000 social rent homes for local needs. And the straight answer to the straight question is we are confident we'll be delivering those. But coming back to the earlier point that we kind of discussed, we want our social homes to be well designed and very low carbon. And so, therein lies the challenge, and it's securing the funding and working with partners to deliver on that ambition. So we're very confident. This is where our relationships across the sector are really, really important, and the good work that we did in the last administration comes into play to try and help that. We have to be confident, and actually the benefit there of delivering sort of low carbon houses is that it benefits those residents living in them as well, with lower utility bills as well. And we know that that's going to be a key thing as we try and tackle the cost of living crisis that we're currently going through.
Really relates to the second viewer question from David Hutt, director at Glees, who's asking about modular housing and how that fits into your plans to create low carbon homes and particularly social and affordable homes. Does modular form a big part of your plans?
So that's it's an interesting one, and I'm aware that it's a debate that's happening again across London, in fact probably across the country. And I think what I would say to that is that given the scale and variety of housing needs that we have within the borough, it would be wrong to say that a certain type of housing is not capable of helping. However, what I would say is that our priority has to be that new homes are firstly affordable to the needs of local people, as well as being sustainable. And so whilst modular homes may have a role to play in this, its ability to realise those aims and ability to be delivered at scale as of yet have not been sufficiently demonstrated. So in many respects, the answer is maybe, but we need to see more about how they deliver elsewhere where they are used and understand them a little bit better before we sort of put our eggs into one basket, because the needs are so diverse within the borough.
Fantastic, thank you. Fair enough. And I'd like to put another question sort of based on that kind of cleaner, greener agenda. It seems to me as a sort of outside observer that low traffic neighbourhoods, LTNs, formed quite a significant election issue across London and other parts. What's your take on them and the role that they play in providing a cleaner, greener borough versus the sort of resistance and opposition to them, and where that leads us in the conversation about the behavioural change that has to happen for all Hounslow residents, the scale of that change that has to happen in order for you to hit your targets as a low carbon borough?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So for me personally, I'm very much, I mean, I was on the cabinet when we discussed the introduction of low traffic neighbourhoods, And I'm very much in favour of them, because actually, in terms of that piece around relating it back to residents say they want cleaner air, and this is a key way to achieve cleaner air. And yes, there has been significant, not just in Hounslow, but elsewhere as well, resistance to that change. And to a certain degree, you kind of expect that resistance because it is a very big change. And we had to implement a lot of them at pace. So, in an ideal world, you probably want a longer lead in to it, and a little bit more in the way of conversations. And this is where that whole piece around the conversation that you have with local residents around some of these big changes comes into play, and really understanding what they like. But nonetheless, when we implemented them, they were always with regular review and tweaks, and I think that's really, really important. And we've got a couple that we're committed to looking at and understanding a little bit more in South Chiswick over the sort of course of this year. So there are some conversations there around changes that might be possible there, and then rolling out across the borough. I think we are still a very car reliant society in Hounslow, and I think some of that can be understood with, especially on the side that I sort of represent. I represent the sort of Feltham and Heston side of the borough, which is closest to the airport. Big pockets of deprivation there, people working shift work, so there is a reliance on cars. And that behaviour will take a while to change, and part of that is having the public transport infrastructure available there, and offering real alternatives to car use. We haven't quite bottomed out that discussion yet, but it's a discussion that we want to have with the public at large, because I think it's important to take them on that journey with you.
Fantastic, thanks, Shantanu. I'm going to use that as an opportunity to move on to the next section, which is around partners and partnerships, which you've already mentioned. I want to ask you about the sorts of partners that you're seeking to help you deliver your wish list. I'd like to start by being really specific. The airport as a partner. How do you feel about the balance of the contribution that an airport can make to your economy, the number of jobs it provides, the stimulation that it provides to development and growth and business locally, versus the vulnerability that you have as a borough to the airport's fortunes, which was exposed by COVID, the number of jobs that are vulnerable to changes in air traffic and airport business. How do you feel about the sort of that dynamic? What's the airport like as a partner?
So the airport as a part, we have a very good partnership. So I regularly meet with the chief executive of Heathrow Airport, and actually it's I think the perception out there is that the airport is looking after the airport, and actually what I've come to realize over many years, even before the pandemic, is that actually the airport wants to be a good local partner to local authorities and residents, because such a large number, again, in my ward, the ward that I represent, Heston West, a large proportion of the population there are actually employed directly or indirectly as a result of Heathrow being where it is. So that's a massive impact, and we really saw the impact of a reduced aviation sector during the pandemic, and the effect it had locally. We saw a massive increase in claims for council tax support, which is a discount that we offer on the council tax bills. We saw an increase in universal credit applications from my side of the borough because of the downturn in aviation. So there are environmental concerns that I know we have to address in terms of Heathrow. My sense is from my conversations with them that they are also very aware of those challenges, and they're up for dealing with that challenge. And they are an absolute key local employer. And so the challenge for us is, how do we scale up some of their activity in terms of local employment, apprenticeships, and opportunities for young people, especially in the borough. But also, we have to be aware that if there is a downturn, it did catch us a little bit by surprise. The pandemic kind of changed the rule book completely. So what we're doing as a council is, again, using our unique position to look at things like skills escalators and the local supply chain. So changing our procurement practices to buy local as opposed to using national suppliers, and skilling up people who have traditionally done sort of low pay jobs associated with the airport, how we can skill them to get proper jobs that pay decent London living wage that we're really keen on in the economy more widely.
So using the airport as a partner to make those things happen. Okay, let's a different aspect of partnership. You mentioned life chances for young people. What partners do you need to make that happen? What ability does a council have to actually improve life chances for young people? Because you don't run the hospitals, you don't really run the schools, right? So what can you do there? What sort of partners do you need to support you?
So it's not so much about running them. You're absolutely right in what you're saying, Toby. But the key here is using our position as very much the sort of centre of the community. So as a council, we work with so many different people, organisations, both public and private, on a daily basis, and so there's that sort of hard power, the sort of you can build something into a planning application and a planning document and a Section 106 agreement and all of that, and that's absolutely fine, and that's proper. But actually, it's the soft influence that's really important. It's saying, look, guys, we have these issues, and if we have these issues, you're also going to feel the impact of those issues, be it unemployment, be it deprivation. That will all have an impact on the way you interact with the borough as a whole. So how can we work together? And I think we showed that really well during the pandemic. Again, very quickly we were able to get a range of partners from Heathrow, Brentford, and a lot of the businesses, Sky and GSK at the time, around the table to say, look, here's the challenge laid out. We're seeing the effects of deprivation. We're seeing the effects of a downturn in the economy. We were the second highest gross value added in London. We're now suffering because of the downturn and people losing their jobs. How can we come up with solutions together? Because it needs to be together, so that we can try and deal with these. Because the reality is, if each individual part of that system goes it alone, actually you'll get some solutions, but you won't get a joint up solution. You probably won't achieve the outcomes that you want to achieve.
So you're sort of acting as a convener, if you like, of all of the influencers that can have an effect on your ambitions. Is that the same when you're talking about your ambitions in development and growth, or are you a bit more direct there with using, as you said, planning regulations and the local plan to ensure that the houses that you want get built and so on?
So there's a joint role in my mind there. So there is the convener role, and that's about putting out the message that Hounslow is open for business. It's open for a conversation, and actually, we've got expertise within the organisation to start thinking about some of the fundamental issues that affect residents in the borough, and businesses as well. Beyond that, then the more formal side of it is actually how do we translate some of those conversations and say to those that want to come into the borough, look, this is our ask, this is what we're looking for. So our local plan doesn't need to just identify sites that could be developed for what use. It's actually about that place. So I've asked my colleague Tom Bruce to take on the regeneration and development portfolio, as Steve used to hold that. And a part of his brief is, let's really look about the place. So it's not just about the bricks and mortar that you're putting into the ground and the Section 106 agreement that you're going to put in place, but it's about saying development works in Hounslow because it doesn't just build something, it regenerates an area. And that's really, really important for me. And I think for residents as well, actually, they are more receptive to the idea that not only will something be built next to their house or further down the road, but actually as part of that, we'll be looking at their local parks and green spaces, we'll be looking at the conditions of their pavements, we'll be looking at what the community needs as a whole, and that will be delivered because we had really good, robust conversations with our partners who wanted to come and invest in the borough because we wanted them to come and invest in the borough.
Thanks, Shantanu. Now, I've kind of directed all of your responses on partnerships, and do feel free to talk about other partnerships or other ways in which you're looking at partners. But my last sort of direct question is around a sort of internal partner you've got. You've got a wholly owned company, Lambton 360. What's the future of the partnership with that? How do you see making use of them as a partner?
So Lambton is actually really key to all our plans, and it's been through a process of development and evolution over the last couple of years, and not helped by the pandemic. I mean, the idea of a wholly owned local authority company is that they are used to deliver a lot of the services that we offer. So at the moment, our the Lambton group of companies deliver for us maintenance on our estates. They deliver our maintenance on green spaces. They do development and leisure as well. So and waste and recycling as well, of course. And the idea is that we are able to be a little bit more commercial in the way we use Lambton to try and generate a surplus that goes directly back into the services that we offer. So Lambton will be really key, and in the same way that the council has changed the way it procures services to be more locally based, Lambton has done exactly the same. And I think I saw a figure a few months ago saying that actually of all their procurement on the development side, 70% was procured locally, which is fantastic for the local economy. So we want to do more of that, and we want Lambton to be quite commercial. At the moment, the barrier to that is actually the recovery from the pandemic, and that fundamentally changed a lot of our assumptions around the way Lambton would work. So we're reassessing that, looking forward, and so that it can start delivering on some of our aims over the next couple of years.
Thank you. I guess underlying all of this conversation about partners is what you referred to earlier, which is the sort of austerity of the last 10 years or so, and the financial straits of the council. You continue to hold the portfolio for finance, as I understand it. The council's finance, Hounslow's finance, how bad is it?
So there's a lot within that, and I don't want to make it sound too technical, but at the heart of it, we've had about £160 million over the decade of austerity taken out from the organisation. So that's, someone put it to me, it's 60 pence in every pound that comes in goes straight, has gone, and that really does impact on our ability to offer services. And so we have gone through that process of having to cut services that the residents held dear, and it was very, very painful. However, I would balance that, and perhaps I would say this as the Cabinet Member for Finance, but we are a very prudent council. We really do look after the money, and we look fundamentally at how we can continuously deliver value for money, and we're very lean as an organisation, but very efficient. And part of our mantra about being ambitious for Hounslow is not necessarily about increasing the cost. It's about being innovative on how we offer services going forward. So, in terms of challenges on my desk constantly, we know that we've got an aging population. People are living longer, and that's a great blessing. But within that comes the demand on adult social care, and that's my biggest spending area. In children's services, especially in special educational needs, there are big pressures, and the funding solutions that we would expect from government just aren't there at the moment. And we're, as a sector, local government, I think across the board, I think if you talk to other council leaders would say exactly the same thing. They are having to fight for funding that just isn't forthcoming. So, we're holding deficit positions on some of our SEN stuff, which government has accepted we can do. But for us, our natural instinct says holding a deficit position is not ideal. So it makes things difficult. But if we're being efficient, if we're understanding where the cost pressures are, it means that we can prioritise money there when it's needed, and really manage the market effectively. And we can also look at where we can innovate as well. So we've tried to keep a really tight control on the purse strings. It gets harder and harder. The other thing within that is obviously council tax. So we've always said as a council that we wouldn't increase council tax unless we absolutely had to. Part of the problem now is that some of the funding that comes forward from government, even though it is a sort of low amount, we've got a low base, is contingent on us taking council tax increases. So we have to take some of those unpopular decisions, but be very clear with our residents that we will be prioritising things like adult social care, children's services, the environment, and public realm as well, in that money, that increase in council tax that we take from residents. And of course, we've got the most generous council tax support scheme actually in the country. So we're one of very few councils in the country who still offer up to 100% discount. And our bands it's a banding system, and they're very tight. So those on the lowest incomes are almost guaranteed to get the support that they're requiring. We've got so many different funds that we offer, from discretionary housing payments to hardship funds as well that we offer. So there's a lot in there, and you only really achieve it by understanding where the pressures are, understanding what's coming in, and really pushing the councillors and the officers here in the council to be innovative with every pound that's spent.
Thank you. I feel that I've got you right into your comfort zone there, talking about finance. So I'm going to possibly take you out of it again now by moving on to ask you about good development. I'd like to hear, our viewers would like to hear what you consider to be an example of good development, or perhaps development you're most proud of.
Yeah, and it comes back to the point that I made earlier about the place, and that's really, really important for me. It's about not just what goes into the ground and the legal agreements that sit off to the side of it. So for me, I'll give you a really interesting example, something that happened before I became leader, but certainly I was on the council at the time, and that was a development in Feltham North ward at the Sparrow Farm estate. Now, that estate, by way of background, those that don't know it, is in a very deprived area. It's an estate that hasn't seen much love recently, but there is a very strong community spirit within that estate. So people there genuinely know who their neighbours are, know what's going on in the local area, and they felt the need that they kind of articulated the need that they wanted the council to recognise that community spirit there. So the development that came up was on an old community building, and as you can imagine, some very loud voices speaking against it. I remember the planning committee I was on the planning committee at the time. Very, very tough meeting. Lots of heated opinions, lots of anger that we were getting rid of what in essence was an existing community hub, even though it wasn't really, because it was falling apart, and replacing it with flats and a community space there. So, in terms of that place, we realized very early on that actually those with the loudest voices we would hear, and we needed to listen to them. It's always important to listen to them, but there was a body of people there, and our community outreach team kind of told us that just would not engage. They would not engage through the formal process that you would expect, that sort of set piece, public exhibition, and maybe a meeting with some questions. They just weren't engaging. So actually we went out there. We went out there to those local people, went door to door, and asked for not what they wanted to see for that development, but what they wanted to see for their estate, and what it meant to them to live on Sparrow Farm. And that gave us fantastic insight. And this is all pre-pandemic, by the way. So, we hadn't developed a lot of our community solution stuff yet. So this is early work. But through that, we were able to identify that people wanted a community space that was available for all. They felt that those with the loudest voice were dominating the current community space, and actually it wasn't inclusive for the whole estate, and it wasn't a place where they could go. Plus, they felt that their estate hadn't been loved enough, and that kind of informed the planning application that went in for those housing, and the community centre that was also on the same site. So whilst we had that period that was very difficult during the sort of decision for that planning application, actually, because we did that work and we understood the place, we understood what people wanted, we articulated that to our development partner, they were able to put in a scheme that made sense and regenerated the centre of that estate, and then acted as a sort of centre for our wider regeneration of the whole estate through the various other departments that had an interest on that estate. And as a result, now that community centre, I kid you not, is used almost every day, which I think is unheard of for community centres. And there's a real spirit around the centre of that estate and that community centre. And the community feel like they've got something that they wanted on the estate that they love. And I think that's a really good example of good development and how you work with your partners.
Funnily enough, we've got a webinar coming up. I think it's not until September, on making use of full use of community centres and other public facilities. How councils can kind of go about doing that, and what the benefits are in terms of resilience. The lessons that you've learnt there in Feltham North, how are you making sure that those are sort of translated to what we mentioned earlier, the pledge for a £300 million investment in Hounslow's council estates?
It's actually at the centre of what we do. So, we talk a lot about community solutions, and it's about that piece around the council coming to residents rather than residents going to the council. And so the learning from Sparrow Farm really informed actually another scheme that I'm really proud of, because it sits in my ward, on the Convent Way estate, which is again a very tired estate, a huge estate. I mean, when I have to canvass it's the biggest headache I have during canvassing season, because it is just lunch. So vast. Yeah, well, yeah, pack lunch and a massage afterwards. We use that learning around place and engaged with them really early, and the key here is engaging with people early. So it's the planning application is the real sort of end of the process, and there's a lot that goes in beforehand. So we had a dedicated team, first of all, on estate regeneration. There were two estates. There was Convent Way and Carlton House in Brentford as well. Similar sort of process, and it's about our officers going out and speaking to people at a very early stage and saying, look, we know you've told us this estate is tired. You feel it. You feel that the council really hasn't invested in your community, in your place. What would you like to see? And it's that open conversation. So you don't go there with, here's the plan, what do you think? It's what would you like? And really understanding. So there we were getting really strong themes around provision for young people and the quality of housing. That informed a lot of the early plans. Now, with a big estate regeneration like that, one of the key barriers was, well, the fundamental question of where will we go whilst you're regenerating this? So, on that estate, we're going to not build the first block, move people from the nearest block into it, then knock that down and work down the estate. And eventually we will increase the amount of housing, both social and private, on that estate. But we were very clear about that, and we were very clear about articulating what the community had asked us for and how we were actually going to deliver that. Now, that estate regeneration went to ballot, and some of the figures that we got from that were absolutely amazing because of that engagement. So I think we got 90% participation in the ballot. Sorry, no, 80% participation. And of that 80% participation, 90% were in favour of the regeneration. Now, if I got figures like that for my election, I'd be over the moon. I'd probably stand for MP, but that's a different point.
So you might not be here, you might be in Russia.
Well, yeah, exactly that. So, okay. But that to me is a real template for how you regenerate an area and actually how you engage in a meaningful way. I think the message I would give, and I don't mean this in a sort of harsh way to those in your audience, is that all too often residents tell us that developers came and talked to us, but it was a set piece, public exhibition, and we had some chats, but we don't really feel like our requests, our asks, our aspirations were taken into consideration in the final plans. And often it's those ones that generate the most noise and actually mask the fact that we have some really good development partnerships in the borough that deliver some real good. And we want to harness that moving forward.
Fantastic, thank you. So let's delve a little bit more into your background and try and understand a bit more about the person shaping this vision. Tell us a bit about your influences. Who or what are the sort of key influences on the way you look at growth and development and housing and so on?
In one respect, having been born and brought up in the borough, you don't really, from a young age, kind of see it. You don't really understand it until you get more involved. So my influence is actually coming into politics in the first place, and it's that challenge around, you talk about community, you talk about Hounslow, but what does that actually mean to you, and what does it mean to those around you? And often articulating that has been very, very difficult because there is so much. Hounslow is so many, it's so diverse, so different. So really articulating that has been difficult, often difficult for me personally, but it's all about vision. And actually, without sounding cheesy, Steve Curran was a big influence on that in terms of vision, because he definitely had a vision about supporting people into housing. And for him, the story was always, whatever happens in terms of the conversation around development, look at those individuals that we go and meet as councillors who are moving into the house for the first time, and the look of joy on their face and relief that they've got a roof over their head. And that's really, really important. More broadly than that, that challenge around what does it mean to be a resident in Hounslow, that was something that I was challenged by my political mentor who brought me into politics. He always used to talk about it's all very well talking about big vision, but actually it's about those individuals on the street that you meet and the change that you make for them that really influences my thinking. So moving the council closer to people is so important, because people need to feel invested in their local area. They need to feel listened to, and that's always been a driving force for me. So even when I with my previous portfolio and my current portfolio, actually, on the finance, it's not so much about the pounds and pence in the town hall. It's about how those pounds and pence are being spent locally to the benefit of local people, and that really is something that is very, very important to me.
Who was your mentor?
It's a Councillor Rajawat. So he was one of the ward councillors. So at the age of 16, I went and did some work experience with my MP at the time, Alan Keane, who sadly passed away, and he introduced me to Rajawat. And Rajawat, I think one of the first things he said to me is, lots of high and mighty stuff happens at Parliament. Let's talk about what's happening locally. You live in the area. What are you seeing? What are the issues that you're seeing? What and you're hearing about? Okay, well, here's a challenge. How would you deal with that? And what would you do that was different? Okay, that's very high and mighty and big vision stuff. What about the small things, the small interventions that you can put into place? And he really challenged me on that. And I think that's really grounded my thinking around where I want Hounslow Council to be, and how I want our council to interact with our partners.
And you mentioned you spent time on the planning committee. How long were you on that committee, and how did that influence how you look at planning and development? Did it change how you see things?
Yeah, it definitely did. So again, before you go onto the planning committee, I don't think you fully appreciate the level of complexity in some of the conversations that go on, and I fully appreciate that. I think the way it sort of shaped my view on it is that the good developments that you saw, they shone through beyond the officer's report. You'd hear the developer come and address the committee, and you think to yourself, wow, this person is saying something that really accords with what I think the borough needs. And at that point in time, when I was on the planning committee, actually, I hadn't developed as much of the vision as I have now. So, it helped in that sort of that process that I had and I've been through. But you could really tell that they had been out and spoken to local people and really understood what made them tick, and not only spoke to them, but then also reflected that in their plans, be it through changes or concessions that sometimes they made, and that would shine through in comparison to those who came across. I mean, I, by way of example, probably the worst planning committee I had to sit through was the applicant's agent sat there and went, this is what your officers are saying. They are telling us that this is why the scheme should be recommended, and I've got nothing more to add to that. And it really got the planning committee's back up. It was like, well, okay, our officers are there to do the technical stuff. What about the rest of it? And that's an example of what I think is bad partnership working. It's hiding behind a technical document rather than understanding what Hounslow is all about.
That's really insightful. Thank you. And you mentioned earlier in our interview a formative university experience. I don't know. You sort of dangled some sort of something happened at university, and I'm very curious. So I'm not going to let go. Well, tell us about your how university influenced your career.
You weren't meant to pick up on that, Toby. No, I mean, it was really interesting. So I did my degree at the University of Kent at Canterbury. So I think the first thing for me was actually leaving London. Having been in Hounslow, done all my education there, in many respects, Hounslow is a very busy place. It's very vibrant. There's a lot going on, and there's always something going on. And so moving out of London to Canterbury was a big change. Everything stopped at 11 o'clock pretty much. And, there were 2 clubs in the city, and not even they were open all the time. So, it was understanding that there are variations everywhere. But what I found about Canterbury is that the sense of community was much, much better. I mean, people actually knew who their neighbours were. And they knew what was happening in the local community, and they were very invested. So, you know, there'd be street parties, and there'd be people mingling and talking, and that was a real change from a lot of Hounslow, where people kind of go to work and come home, and then they're within their family units, and that was very, very different for me, and it was that sort of understanding around what it means to be a community, and also in terms of in development terms, although I know that's not the crux of your question. It was fascinating looking at Canterbury, you know, such a historic city, with modern bits that kind of blended in and complemented what was already there, and that was a key lesson for me. It's you know, there I really realized that actually development isn't necessarily a bad thing. It can work really, really well if it's done correctly.
That's not as revealing as an answer as I might have expected from my question, but insightful in its way for our viewers in the development industry. Let's move on and ask about your watershed moments. You know, what are the moments in your life and career that have led you down this path to becoming leader of Hounslow Council?
I think for me, at the age of 16, doing work experience with Alan Keane MP, I think that's the key watershed moment, because before then, you know, although I'd sort of been head boy at school and done all of that, actually politics was something that was sat over there. It was something that was very, very different, and actually going into the office and realizing that you know, MPs are normal people. I think within our communities, there is a tendency to revere them as almost godlike and sitting above, because you know, a lot of cultures see politicians as sort of sitting above everything else. And one of the things that Alan used to do really well is talk to people and really make sure that he was grounded within the local area, and that was a real lesson. You know, people would ring up the office and ask to speak to not Mr. Keane but Alan, because they'd met him at an event or they'd met him somewhere and he'd had a really nice conversation, and that just reminded me to stay grounded, and that's a key watershed. I think actually getting elected to the council in 2010 is a key watershed moment for me, because you realise in local government, you actually have a lot of levers and a lot of power, and you can do a lot of good things in a tangible way. And you know, it's interesting talking to some Labour MPs, because we're sat in opposition at Westminster, actually watching that and you know, them saying we actually really have very little we can achieve, whereas you can actually achieve quite a bit. And then the final watershed, I appreciate we're probably running out of time, is actually having my son in 2016. You know, that's a key moment for me, because actually it changes your perspective on life. You know, as an adult, you kind of look at the things that are important to you, but actually when you're bringing up a child, you look at what's important for them and what's important in the area around you, and it really changes your perspective. So that's a really key watershed moment for me in terms of some of the stuff that I've spoken about this morning.
Shantanu, if you've got the time, I'd like to just ask a question around that. So you mentioned the experience, the work experience that you did with your MP. Have you always been about, you know, has your whole career been about politics? Was there a moment where you might have gone down a different path, or everything has been leading to your election to Hounslow Council?
No, I think actually, you know, one of the things you have to acknowledge when you stand for local office is that certainly in outer London, it's slightly different in inner London because of the way it's funded, but certainly in outer London you can't be a local representative full time. So for a long time, up until becoming leader recently, I had a day job. And I think that's actually, you know, it makes your life very difficult in the sense that it makes you very, very busy. But actually having that that separation, I think, is really, really important. So, having that ability to say, right, today I'm really focusing in on the day job as opposed to politics, I think is important to keep you grounded, because otherwise you can get sucked into the political machine, as it were, and to a certain degree you lose perspective that way. So whilst I've always aspired to be leader, since I became councillor, that's always been an aspiration. I've always acknowledged that you need to have something else that you do, because otherwise you lose all perspective. And that's probably the worst thing. And so, yeah.
So what was that job?
I was a diamond buyer. I used to buy diamonds. Slightly unusual. So I worked for a company that manufactured engagement rings, and my role was to sort of understand the specification and find the right stock. So you'd often be, I spent most days talking to polishers in Mumbai and Tel Aviv, having very similar conversations. Actually, it sounds more exciting than it actually was. Lots of foul mouth people that you were dealing with on a daily basis, having quite difficult conversations. But it was good fun as well. And actually, dealing with customers, I think is an important skill to have. Being able to negotiate and talk through things is really important. That's really helped on the political side.
Yeah, and I guess it's fair to say that you're a negotiator.
It's about vision. It's about being able to set a direction, but it's being able to negotiate that direction. And I think one of the key skills that I've had to learn over the years is how to change direction if the need arises. Being flexible. It's all very well having a single vision, but sometimes something comes along that makes you think, hold on a second, a different direction might work a lot better because someone's made a really good suggestion, and being able to negotiate your way through that is really important.
Fascinating, thank you. Okay, final question. What do you do when you're not working?
Oh God, so I'm a massive foodie. I love eating. I love going out to eat. Unfortunately, I'm often in the town hall for late meetings, so I don't get to spend time with as much time with my family as perhaps I'd like. So we express our love through food, and going out to restaurants, trying new cuisines. Apart from that, I enjoy things like going to a movie, the theatre. Arts and culture is something that's really important to me personally, and so being able to go to the theatre is an unwind and see something that makes you think in a different way. That's really, really important. So I do a lot of that. And
what are you most looking forward to seeing?
In terms of theatre,
movie or play? Yeah.
So well, we've got a new cinema in Hounslow, so I just want to watch anything in there at the moment. But I'm a big fan of musicals, and so there's nothing currently on the wish list. But I think my favourite West End show is The Lion King, and I'd love to take my son to go and see The Lion King, because I think actually the theatrics and the production there are absolutely amazing, and seeing his face as he watches that, he wasn't too keen on the film, but I think he'll really love the production, and that's something that I really enjoy.
How old is he?
He's coming up to 6. He'll be 6 in July, so he's at that age where everything is very interesting. We're very nosy about everything. We want to know about everything, and everything is why are we doing this? Why are you doing that? Yeah, so great fun.
to which your answer is ask your mother. What's your favorite place away from home?
Oh God, my favorite place away from home is India, specifically Jaipur, because that's where my parents were brought up. That's where my wife was brought up. And a lot of my family is there, so that feels very much like home away from home. And it's nice to be spoilt for a couple of weeks, every couple of years when you manage to get out there. But it's a very cultural place. It's a very historic place. And being able to see that and understand that, and again, bringing it back to my son, helping him understand where our roots are, is really, really important to me. So I particularly love going there, but I also like going on holiday generally and exploring new places. We loved going to Thailand a couple of years ago because there are so many similarities between Indian and Thai culture, but so many differences as well. And being a foodie, I love Thai food, so that was a bonus as well.
I wanted to kind of close off. I was going to ask you earlier about how you feel people would describe your leadership style, but I think I'm more interested, I think, in asking how would your friends describe you?
I think my friends would describe me as a little bit wacky in social circles. I like to have a laugh when I'm with friends. I don't want too many serious conversations. I think they would say that I've got an infectious laugh. When I start laughing, I get the giggles very quickly, and find it hard to control myself. And I think they would probably describe me as quite a good listener. I do like listening, and then just putting in that little challenge that just simulates a little bit more debate, because I like understanding and learning what makes other people think.
And that's a perfect note on which to close the interview, I think. I'm sorry I didn't get you to laugh uncontrollably. I'd love to have done that, and I shall put my mind to it next time we meet, Shantanu.
Absolutely.
But I really ought to let you get away and build some houses and run the borough. So please accept my warmest thanks for taking part in our live interview. Viewers, our voice of authority today, the new leader of Hounslow Council, Councillor Shantanu Rajawat. And while the virtual applause is ringing out, I'll take the time to thank you, viewers, as well, for sparing the time to tune in and learn about the man behind the vision for Hounslow. We're going to be back in a couple of weeks on the 30th of June with the London Construction Programme and guests to discuss improving mental health in the construction industry. That's a really critical conversation. And then we're going to be back on the 5th of July to welcome Mark Bagent, who's Corporate Director of Regeneration and Culture at the London Borough of Redbridge, for our next interview. You can register for both of those sessions in the chat. Now, meanwhile, from our voice of authority, Councillor Shantanu Rajawat, from Carter Jonas and GLE and London Square Partners, from me and from everyone at 3 Fox, good afternoon.